Thank you very much, and welcome once again to Where Are They Now? And as we've been previewing for the last 2 hours, we're going to catch up with Dr. Val Gene Iven, the head team physician here at Oklahoma State. I don't know if Val Gene's on the road or not, but the connection sounded good. Good to have you on, and what we want to do is kind of get into this both feet and talk about maybe – I use a book analogy, Val Gene. Maybe this is right, wrong, or indifferent. We're kind of getting to the last couple of chapters here of this pandemic where we might know how the ending's going to come out. But I want to start before the first chapter was written. What was it like when you guys first, as a medical group, caught wind that this was something you're going to have to deal with?
Well, Tom, I hope that we're nearing the end.
Well, I guess we'll get. Maybe I don't want to jump. I knew you were going. I knew you were going to correct me.
I don't want you to get me here.
I know.
No, I think we are. Things, we think things are moving in the right direction, but you still get reports, and there's still concern with this Delta variant. And I had a friend today said he was vaccinated and he was traveling and he acquired it and got sick. And it seems like it's right now. It's the vaccines that we've got in place are fairly well protected. But, you just kind of hear a story here and there that someone had the vaccine and they've gotten COVID here just recently. I think those cases have to be the Delta variant, and more often than not, they're probably in the younger population that are not vaccinated. But having said that, that's the population that we're talking about today.
Not that you guys even know near as much as you would like to in the medical community about this virus, but let's go back to the beginning, that first page before the first chapter was starting to be written, even before the Oklahoma City Thunder thing when the game was ended and before it ever started because of the virus. What was the medical community hearing prior to that this might be something you'd have to deal with down the line?
We weren't hearing a lot, Tom. That was why it unfolded as quickly as it did. There was talk. There were a few questions from time to time. What do you think? How does this look? What's this looking like? And there just wasn't a lot of information out there. And so we headed off to for the most part that spring, and we headed off to Kansas City for the Big 12 tournament. Mm-hmm. I don't think any of us could have forecasted what happened that night moving forward. Completely unexpected. I was in a meeting with our team physicians and with the kind of the deputy of the NCAA sports medical aspect of sports committee, and we had him in our meeting room, and there was news that was breaking that things were being canceled as we spoke, and he didn't even know about it at that point.
Jeez.
That's how quickly that things were happening, just right before our eyes.
Of course, we know the Big 12 tournament, men's, women's, was scuttled right there, right after Oklahoma State did play one game, obviously. They played the Iowa State game and won. How quickly was the medical team assembled here at Oklahoma State upon your arrival back in Stillwater?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. We as I was driving back that day, we were talking. I was just thinking at the time, what will we need to be doing, and we didn't know. We didn't have any idea what was going to happen in front of us. Our first thought was, who's on campus. We were anticipating playing baseball. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, nothing had been canceled except for the Big 12. On that drive back from Kansas City, nothing had been canceled except for the Big 12 basketball tournament and the NCAA basketball tournament shortly thereafter. So then that subsequent week is when things started to unravel, and the remainder of the spring sports got canceled. So at that point, we had to get together and decide, okay, now how are we going to manage those student athletes that are already on campus, and are we equipped? In the face of a pandemic that we know very little about, are we equipped to take care of them? What's the capacity of our facilities, primarily Stillwater Medical Center, and anything that we would need to utilize in Oklahoma City or Tulsa? And of course, I reached out to infectious disease consultants, and they were already way deep into the conversation prior to us, just in their preparation phases at that point in time. So it was a fast-paced conversation with everybody, and it was like you can't have enough conversations quick enough.
It seems like, from outside looking in and not being in the medical community, just what you described appeared to be, just for a second, maybe a daunting task, but you and your colleagues didn't let that get in the way of assembling expertise and formulating a plan.
Well, I got on the horn pretty quickly, and that first week was kind of your own institution and just trying to decide what's best for your own institution. But in that moment, we're also talking with our colleagues around the conference and our friends around the country, to be quite honest with you, in the NBA, and kind of get a feel for what they were thinking in the NFL, and trying to, you're at the time you're kind of thinking, Tom, short term and long term. You're trying to decide, what do we do now, but then also, what are we going to be doing 2 weeks from now and a month from now, and then much less September. But yeah, we started conversations, pulled together our training staff, obviously, and our administration on campus, and then we got together within the first 3 weeks, I would say, as a conference, just because everybody was wanting to try to be on the same page when it came to bringing athletes back on campus, and when was the safest time to do that consistently across the conference.
That intrigues me in itself, because medicine being what it is, I mean, no two patients are alike, and I would assume no two conference venues were alike. You could say, well,
that's exactly right. Yeah,
1, 2, 3 would work here, but maybe 2 and 3 wouldn't work over here.
Yeah, we would give updates. We met twice as a conference on Mondays and Thursdays, and we would go around the horn and give updates from all of our institutions as head team physicians. And it was interesting to hear what people were going through, throughout the conference. And there were times where, we brought our kids back early, if you remember, June the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like I was a bit ahead of the curve with what I was experiencing before everybody else did, until they got back. Once they got back, they experienced the same things that we did. So we kind of served as a little bit of a model in terms of our conference, just, and I'm not saying all the things to do. I'm saying some of the things not to do.
Mm-hmm.
The things to be aware of, and kind of how you had to orchestrate all the moving parts as it pertained to your protocol, right? And the protocol you thought you had in place. We all spent just a ton of hours on these protocols, but it wasn't until you got your first test results back and truly had a positive that you put that protocol into play.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know until you put a model into place, really, honestly, how it's going to turn out for you.
I heap all kinds of praise, and I think you do too. And I made mention, you're not going to take any credit for anything, but I will put it your way. We'll get into your team and the people you want to talk to here, or about here, in a minute. But be honest with our listeners here. Going back to the early stages of this and the conversations you had with coaches and with players in all sports here at Oklahoma State, did you see what was the overall reaction? Was it, we're in both feet in the circle, we don't believe half of this, or do we have to do this? What was the feel?
Well, the first couple of calls was Coach Holder and Chad, and it was really kind of, Doc, what do you think about all this? What is this? How do you think this is going to look? What kind of situation are we in here? And that was just a tough question. And I didn't know. I mean, I knew that obviously there's concerns. There is a pandemic. It's across the country and the world, and the NBA has canceled the game, and that's an ominous sign, obviously, when things kind of filter down from the top levels downward. And so certainly when they canceled, I knew that didn't look good for us for the remainder of the spring at least. And so at that point, that's probably the best advice I could offer is to, this spring is not looking good at all. We need to be prepared for that. And then the next thing we need to do is just to kind of come up with a strategy in terms of the kids that are on campus. Do we want them to stay on campus and not risk them traveling, or do we want to try to get them home and be with their families? Because at that point, you just don't know how long this is going to extend. Remember, way back then, early conversations are just solely around, do we have enough ventilators, if you'll remember? Do we have enough hospital capacity? And when this first started in New York City, it did not look good. And we're just trying to identify early, who's at risk, who should we be worrying about the most. I didn't think it was going to be young, healthy student athletes, as much as I thought there would be an at-risk population. But to be quite honest, we just didn't have enough data that I could say that confidently. I don't think anybody had that kind of data. And so you have to make decisions on the fly for a disease you've never seen before and you know very little about, and there was nobody that really knew any more. You just accumulated as much information from as many outlets as you possibly could, and we talked daily. I remember we started talking on the phone daily, and I was talking to so many people. I said, "This isn't going to work. We're going to have to start the world of conference calling and Zooms." And that started pretty quickly, and that was just such a much more efficient way to. Little did I know at the time that it was such a much more efficient way to have good conversations that everybody could be in on at one point in time. And we were all as informed as we could be for that given day to help, the athletic department as a whole and all of our coaches and our student athletes and their parents and try to decide initially, what do we do? Do we get them home, or is it best that they stay on campus?
Was there a time in the early going, maybe during that summer period when the kids had come back, that you wondered whether this is going to be a little bigger than we can handle? Because I had asked you this a couple of days ago. I don't know where our total numbers rank, nationally in the Big 12, but it appeared outside looking in that they were manageable numbers. But was there a time where you were thinking, holy cow, I don't know if we can get this thing stopped?
Well, Tom, I didn't know. I did worry there in June when the football guys came back, and we started our regular testing, and we had decided that we're going to test 3 times a week, and then we had a strategy for what we're going to do with those that are positives and how we're going to manage them and follow them and that kind of thing. And there was times where we were getting 6 or 8 positives on a Monday, Wednesday, or a Friday. Of course, we didn't get the result back until the following day. And so you kind of waited a day until you got the results back. And the reason for that is that all the PCR testing, the turnaround times were different. Some people, it was taking 3+ days to get the result back. Others, we could get it back, depending on the lab you were using and the facilities, you could get it back the next day. So if you had a test that was sent and you didn't have results back, and that person was positive, then conceivably he's out infecting others unknowingly. So it was such a encompassing endeavor to make sure that once tested, when you got back in, you couldn't be out among others until you knew your results were negative. And then once your results were negative, then we had to have the plan in place to where you were training in a mask and you were identified that these are your roommates, and try to stay just with your roommates, so that if we did have positives, that it didn't spread to a larger group uncontrollably. We were trying to keep some control, some fashion of control to it, and I think we did. We obviously did through the fall, and once we got into the season, looking, fast forwarding. But that month of June was there was a lot of stress and anxiety. Then they went home. We allowed them to go home, take a break, and they went home for the 4th of July weekend. And you would always, with the incubation period, you would always look at that time frame of about 10 days to 14 days as when you would start to see positives based on previous exposure. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, we had another round of positives for those that had been re-exposed after they'd gone home for the 4th of July weekend. So, you can look back and you can think, what would you have done differently, and how would you have managed it? How would it have changed things? It's almost like everybody, Tom, went through. You almost had to get through that certain phase of kids reconvening on campus. Mm-hmm. And every institution had to do that. And then once you did that and you developed your plan and kids bought in and they followed kind of the strategy, then it was a matter of how airtight your protocols were and how much they were following them. And that was the responsibility of the student athlete.
How difficult was it to get the point across? And I know the coaches had a lot to do with it, with their individual student athletes. For those who were asymptomatic, I mean, you turned up positive, but they didn't feel anything, and you're going to put them
You're
up
exactly right.
in contact tracing. How difficult was it to get that point across to kids?
It was really challenging. It's a great question, and that was very difficult. I think a couple things as we moved throughout the process helped. One was that young people knew if they were primary contacts that they were going to have a time spent in quarantine, mm-hmm. and that was no fun. They were missing out on being able to train and get out and about and being with their teammates in whatever setting that might be, whether it's in a small group session of training or a bigger group, and so they didn't want that. As time went on, that helped us reinforce our quarantine protocols. And then secondly, even the young people, a handful of them that were minimally symptomatic with COVID, there was quite a few that would return to training and really could tell that they were still affected from a stamina perspective. They just had lost a lot of their endurance and their stamina. And that was very surprising to them when they had very minimal symptoms. But that type of a conversation among that group and among those kids, kids talk. Mm-hmm. And when they started to hear that, hey, this happened to me, I think that they started to take that more seriously, and I think then they kind of started to put it all together and started to say, kind of what they want us to do makes sense, and the sooner we do it and the more we buy in as a group, the better chance we have of being able to compete. Because, early on, we're still in the phase of, we're in July. Are we going to be able to say that the season is a go? Mm-hmm. Even the 1st of August. We're planning on camp starting at the normal time, but there's not any great confidence among our medical advisory group in the Big 12 or really around the country that it's going to happen. And that's the time that you started to see different conferences cancel their season.
Kids are so social in their approach and maybe feel bulletproof. We all have at one time or another. I was interested in your response there. In the time that we have left, I know you want to thank a lot of people who were part and parcel of this team effort, if you will. And now's the time, I think, you could do that because it wasn't just you, as you've reminded me a million times.
Gosh, no, Tom. There's so many people. Obviously, Coach Holder and Chad had to buy in, and that's not easy when you know that the season's not going to look like it was going to look. It wasn't anybody's fault, but the sooner they bought in and the sooner they understood the things that we need to do, that certainly set the example. And then it started with football, and like I said, Coach Gundy, I talked with him, and it was a conversation. It was real candid, and I said, I think we can do this, Mike, but we can only do it if all of your coaches buy in and set that example, and then the student athletes have to make it happen, which they did a phenomenal job of. And then our staff, our training staff, every athletic trainer had to take their team and manage it throughout the season, from a testing perspective to travel protocols to all the contact tracing. Each trainer did that among their team on their own. I obviously gave them oversight, but that was just such a challenge that, because other things continue, just like you said the other day. You still have injuries, you still have illnesses otherwise, and everything stayed the same otherwise. Now you're throwing COVID on top of an already demanding schedule. And so the training staff was phenomenal. Scott Parker was just, his diligence and his commitment to what we were doing, just from a standpoint of all the dotting your I's and crossing your T's, was unbelievable. Rod Johnson coordinated all of the management of the housing and the food. You think you got housing available, then you think, okay, now do we have all the essentials in the housing that we need? Are these apartments ready-made? Are they ready for kids to move into? And Rod found that out quickly that they weren't. And so he had to move really quick throughout the nighttime hours, weekends. Then once we got into the season, Mac was just Mac in terms of what he does and how organized he is, and what he did for the kind of how we structured our travel and our buses and our dining and our planes and our rooming situation. And he was just on top of it every step of the way, and we we really had very few hiccups during the season.
Two more things.
They all saw their role, and they took that responsibility very willingly, and we made it.
Two more things before we cut you loose. You set me straight on this because I asked you. Where the vaccination process, I think, is, to be fair, is underway and it's made progress, but you can't force student athletes to be vaccinated, can you?
No, sir, and I don't. That's not what we want to do. We don't do that for influenza, and we don't want to do that for COVID. I don't feel right about that. I want to educate. I want this to be a family decision. I think it's best served if that's the direction we move in, and everybody, I think, respects that in a much better way. Our vaccine numbers have really stalled and slowed, especially in our age group, that 18 to 25-year-olds. But it's not just us; it's around the country, and that's kind of what we're experiencing now. Is the challenge of where will we need to be moving through the summer and into August? Will we need a booster from those that have been vaccinated? Will we need to make a stronger push to get everyone vaccinated? Obviously, we talked about this 70% mark. NCAA is really, in the Big 12 and other conferences, are really even shooting higher than that. Because if we don't reach that, then we're going to revisit the possibility of testing on a weekly basis again, pending what happens with these variants.
On a lighter note, you spent a lot of time at the University of Tennessee before you came here, and the Mannings you're close to. Did you ever think, in your wildest dreams, that you're not old enough? You're not. I'm an old guy. You're not. But do you remember the original GE College Bowl back in the day?
I don't, Tom, but I'm older than you think I am.
Well, they could be on syndication, but I found it interesting that two of the Manning brothers are co-hosting the birth of the College Bowl.
I saw that last night. First, I don't know when that started, but I heard somebody talking about that, and I flipped that on, and I saw Peyton doing that last night.
Did you ever think that they? Well,
no, I really, I kind of thought if he did something, he would be doing something with a broadcast and a commentary or a color guy type of thing. So that was really interesting. I thought I'm curious to see. I'm curious to watch that closer and see what that's all about.
They seem like kind of the ideal family, huh? I imagine you have all kinds of great things to say.
They're a great family. Yeah, it's just it's a great football family. But beyond that, it's just really a close knit, tight family that I sure enjoyed getting to know.
Well, congratulations to you and your team. I think we set a standard, if you will. This is just me speaking. Nationally and within the conference of how to do this thing when it was start from scratch, and I got to think. And again, you're not taking any credit, so I won't even make you say it. But you're going to deflect it all. But somebody had it headed up, and I think you certainly deserve the credit for what's gone on up till now. And I will stand corrected as always, as you always correct me. It's not over yet, right? Well, I would like to think it is, but it's not.
That's the nature of medical people, So I just don't want to. I don't want to goon ourselves and get a step ahead of where I think and hope we're moving. But thank you so much for calling and for all you do. You're an icon, so it's sure been a pleasure to visit with you.
Val Gene, always a treat for me, and I need to come by your office more often, and we can shoot the breeze there as well. But anyway, thanks for a interesting half an hour for sure. And I know our fans and listeners got a lot out of it. And we'll visit again soon, I promise.
Good talking to you, Tom. Come by anytime.
All right, buddy. Thank you. That is Dr.
Bye-bye.
Val Gene Iven right there, the head team physician, just a